I didn't realize a single sentence could end a relationship, until my girlfriend looked my parents in the eyes and said, "Your son is wonderful, but I'm still keeping my options open." She was squeezing my hand under the table. I let go, stood up and said calmly, "We need to leave." My parents froze. She tried to explain. I didn't let her. Dinner with my parents had started like it always did, that familiar calm that made everything feel stable, safe, inevitable. No one could have imagined that within minutes, that feeling would shatter, cleanly and permanently. We left my apartment just before 7 p.m. The dashboard clock read 6:58, 2 minutes early. I adjusted the bottle of Chardonnay in the passenger seat, my mother's favorite, and glanced at Julia. She was focused on her phone, scrolling, the blue light sharpening the angles of her face. "Did that comedy trailer ever come out?" I asked, my voice louder than I meant it to be in the silence of the car. Yeah, 1 second, she replied without looking up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I watched her. She'd been distant for days. Quieter. The afternoon before, I'd asked if something was wrong. "Work stuff, Joel. You know how it is." I believed her. I always did. That afternoon I'd cleaned my apartment, imagining how the night would go. After dessert, I planned to suggest she move in with me. I had the logic ready. My place was bigger, closer to her job. Just made sense. I'd even rehearsed the conversation in the shower. This is the next logical step. "Okay, let's go," she finally said, slipping her phone into her bag and offering a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My parents' house greeted us with the same familiar scents: lemon polish, slow-cooked meat, and old books. My mother, Karen, hugged me tightly, then smiled warmly at Julia. "You look beautiful, dear. That color suits you perfectly." "Thank you, Karen," Julia said, instantly switching on her social charm as she handed over the wine. "We brought this for you." My father, David, emerged from the kitchen drying his hands. He shook my hand firmly, then greeted Julia warmly. "Dinner's almost ready. Please sit." The good glasses were out. Soft music played from the old stereo. It looked like a picture-perfect version of stability and future. Julia sat close to me on the couch, her leg pressed against mine. The tension I'd felt in the car began to fade. Everything was fine. Or so I thought. Dinner was my father's classic stew, carrots and potatoes cooked perfectly. Conversation flowed easily. Dad asked about my new project at work. Mom asked Julia about a charity gala she was helping organize. "It's going to be amazing," Julia said animatedly. "There's even a silent auction with a ski weekend. I'm tempted to keep it for myself." Everyone laughed. Julia shined effortlessly as always. I watched her with quiet pride. Then my mother refilled the wine and asked the question I'd been waiting for all night. "And you too," she said sincerely. "Do you have plans for the future? You seem so stable together." This was it. My heart jumped. Julia reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. I took it as support, as alignment. I opened my mouth to start the speech I'd practiced, but she spoke first. Julia leaned forward slightly, her tone thoughtful, almost gentle. "That's a great question, Karen." She paused, looked at my parents, then glanced down at our intertwined hands and gave mine a soft, almost condescending pat. "Joel is the sweetest man I've ever known," she said. "Truly. So kind. So stable." She said stable the way someone describes a harmless medical condition. "He's like a perfect, cozy fireplace." A chill ran through my stomach. Her gaze drifted toward the window, as if something far beyond that house was more interesting. "But I'm at a point in my life where I need to be absolutely sure about everything," she continued. "I'm young, well, relatively young," she added with a light laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "And I feel like I owe it to myself to keep exploring my options." The world didn't explode. There were no raised voices. No darkness. Everything just became painfully clear. I noticed a tiny stain on the tablecloth. I watched my mother's smile slowly collapse. I saw my father's fork freeze midair. And I felt the dead weight of Julia's hand resting on mine. Exploring my options. With those words, she had just told my parents that their son was temporary, a comfortable place to stay while she searched for something more exciting. The silence was absolute. Only the background music kept playing, completely unaware of what had just happened. I looked at her carefully manicured hands resting on mine, hands much larger, marked by years of work. A gesture that, in another context, might have been affection now felt like the deepest disrespect I had ever experienced. Calmly, without saying a single word, I slid my hand out of hers. The sound of the chair scraping against the wooden floor echoed like a gunshot. I stood up. I looked at my parents. My mother's eyes were shining and my father's face had gone rigid, almost expressionless. "We're leaving," I said. My voice sounded strange, flat, without anger or trembling. It wasn't an argument. It was a fact. I walked around the table and pulled Julia's chair back. She stared at me, confused. "Joel, what are you doing?" "We're leaving," I repeated. I glanced at my father. He gave the slightest nod, barely perceptible, as if handing me something that couldn't be said out loud. I guided Julia, now silent and disoriented, toward the door. I grabbed her purse from the sideboard. I couldn't bring myself to look at my mother. "Thank you for dinner," I said to the space between them. "It was excellent." And just like that, I walked out of my parents' house with what remained of that relationship, leaving behind a future that no longer existed. I had imagined that night ending differently, something softer, more in line with the logic I had always used to organize my life. I thought the conversation would cool slowly at the dinner table, that the awkward silence would do its job, that avoided glances would prevent direct conflict, that, over time, everything would settle without the need for abrupt breakups. I believed it would be enough to let the words sit there, like dirty dishes you decide to wash the next day. But that's not what happened. There was no truce, no pause. The moment we stepped outside, the cold night air hit us like a sharp, merciless slap. That impact seemed to give Julia her voice back, as if the sudden temperature change had flipped a switch she'd been holding down throughout the entire dinner. "Joel, stop." "What was that?" she finally demanded, her tone a mix of surprise and irritation. "Are you being ridiculous right now?" I didn't answer, not because I lacked words, but because I understood that any immediate response would be a concession. I unlocked the car, walked around it with measured steps, and sat in the driver's seat. I closed the door carefully, turned the key, and the engine started with a dry, almost aggressive sound that shattered the silence of the driveway. Julia stood still outside for a few seconds, as if she couldn't believe I was actually going to leave without giving her a longer explanation, without offering the debate she clearly expected. Then she yanked open the passenger door and dropped into the seat, letting the slam of the door punctuate her entrance. "Are you serious right now?" she demanded, turning toward me. "Did you really drag me out of there over a meaningless comment?" I pulled out of the driveway without saying a word. The streets of my parents' neighborhood were dark and quiet, far too peaceful for what had just happened. House lights glowed faintly, some windows dark, others lit by the flicker of televisions. The contrast with the tension still vibrating inside the car felt almost unreal, like switching scenes without warning. "It wasn't a small comment, Julia," I finally said, never taking my eyes off the road. My voice sounded flat, controlled, dangerously calm. "It wasn't." "Oh, please," she snapped, letting out a short, bitter laugh. "You're being overly sensitive. I was just being honest with them." "Real. Don't you always say you value honesty?" "Honesty," I repeated, tasting the word. Just a word. Stripped of context. Stripped of care. Leaving nothing but ash. "Yes, I was telling the truth," she insisted. "I love you, Joel. You know that. But love isn't always enough. There's a whole world out there. I have needs. Curiosities. Expectations. Is it really so terrible to want to be sure before fully committing?" I turned on the signal to make a turn. The rhythmic click of the blinker filled the car, as if it were the only sound left, setting the pace for a conversation that could no longer go back. "So I'm an experiment," I said. "A preliminary step. An emotional lab test." It wasn't an accusation. It was a conclusion. "Don't put words in my mouth," she shot back immediately. "You're my foundation. My anchor." "But even foundations get inspected," I replied. "Just to make sure they can support whatever you plan to build on top of them." The metaphor was so utilitarian, so centered on her own benefit, that it almost shattered my numbness. Almost. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling the rough texture under my fingers. "You humiliated me," I said quietly. "In front of my parents. You turned 2 years of my life into a trial period." "I did not," she replied without hesitation. "You're being dramatic. They adore me. They understood exactly what I meant. This is you deciding to feel hurt because anything that falls outside your perfectly planned life scares you." From there she didn't stop. For nearly 20 minutes she talked nonstop. Her words collided into a whirlwind of justifications, self-victimization, and criticism disguised as concern. That I was misinterpreting everything. That she just needed to grow as a person. That I was too comfortable. Too settled. That it wasn't my fault, but her need to experience more before settling down. That it was healthy. Modern. Normal. That I was sweet, but too much sweetness could turn passive. I drove. I didn't look at her. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, letting every sentence land and harden the ice growing in my chest. And in that internal silence, I understood something with absolute clarity. This was who she was. She always had been. I had simply been too close, too invested, to notice the cold current that had always been running underneath. We arrived at her building. I pulled into a visitor parking spot and shifted the car into neutral. The engine stayed on, vibrating softly. The silence returned, thick, heavy with everything she had already said. Julia watched me, waiting for a reaction. An argument. Tears. A plea. Something she could use, shape, or control. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of the car. I walked around the vehicle and opened her door. One last automatic gesture of courtesy. Almost reflexive. She stepped out slowly, adjusting her coat, searching my face. "Joel, please, talk to me." I looked at her. But this time, I really looked at the woman I had planned a logical, orderly, predictable future with. And I felt nothing. No love. No anger. No disappointment. Just a wide, empty clarity. She took a step toward me and reached out to touch my arm. I took one deliberate step back, out of her reach. Her eyes widened. That was the first real sign of fear I saw in her. Not my words, my physical withdrawal. Come. Deliberate. Final. I held her gaze for one more second. "You're free to explore now," I said. My voice was low. Definitive. Clean of emotion. I turned around, got back into the car, and closed the door. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing on the sidewalk, frozen, her hands still slightly extended, as if her body hadn't fully accepted the decision yet. I didn't wait to see if she moved. I drove away. And with every block I passed, the weight inside the car grew lighter, until there was nothing left but the road, me, and a silence that was no longer filled with excuses, but with a deep peace that was beginning to grow. The silence in my apartment was different. Before, it had been passive. A space waiting for the sound of her keys, her laughter, her comments about my choices. Now I was active. Present. It belonged to me. I didn't break anything. I didn't yell. I stood in the middle of the living room, the same place where I had once imagined conversations about plans and shared futures, and took a deep breath. The numbness wrapped around me like a cocoon. And inside it, something quiet and solid began to rebuild itself, piece by piece. My phone vibrated on the counter. It was my mother, Karen. I answered. "Joel, honey, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," I said gently, cutting her off. My own voice sounded steady. Normal. That surprised me. "It's over." There was a pause on the other end of the line, heavy with worry. What she said at the table, I know. "Please," I interrupted. "Not right now." "Okay," she whispered. "We're here." I hung up. The next step was almost instinctive. Surgical. I unlocked my phone and opened her contact. Her photo appeared, laughing on a beach, taken during a moment I now understood as just another scene in her constant search. I blocked her number. Then I opened Instagram, Facebook, Spotify. Every digital thread that still connected us. Block. Unfollow. Delete. It took less than 3 minutes. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was cleaning. Organizing. Decontaminating my space, my time, and, for the first time in a long while, my own inner voice. The first night, I slept deeply, as if my body had decided to shut everything down completely. The second night was different. I woke up at 3 a.m., my mind fully alert, one scene replaying with uncomfortable clarity. Julia's words at my parents' dinner table came back again and again. Not loaded with pain, but with cold, almost surgical clarity. Exploring my options. I remembered my father's fork frozen in midair. My mother's smile breaking in half, unsure how to respond. I let the humiliation pass through me without resistance. I didn't try to block it or justify anything. I observed it from a distance, like a scientist examining a dangerous sample under a microscope. What I felt wasn't emotion. It was information. And when the gray light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, I understood something clearly. It was over. The sample had been recorded. The impact had run its course. I didn't call in sick to work. I logged on. Attended meetings. Ate lunch in front of my screen like any other day. The world kept functioning without asking for my permission. My hands still knew where to go on the keyboard. My mind could still break down complex problems and make them understandable. That realization was an unexpected relief. It meant I wasn't broken. The real work began after 5 p.m. I signed up for a new gym. Not the casual place I used to visit once in a while, but a serious one. No decorations, heavy barbells, iron plates everywhere, and punching bags hanging from the ceiling. I had no idea what I was doing, so I hired a trainer for 3 sessions just to learn proper technique. The first time I lifted a weight that looked impossible, my muscles burned, my vision blurred, my body protested with every inch of the movement. In that moment, I thought about Julia, about the way she had rested her hand on mine that night. Sweet, stable, safe. I finished the lift, locked the bar overhead, and dropped the plates to the floor. The metallic crash was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. I sent a message to my friends' group chat telling them Julia and I were done. No drama. Different paths, I wrote. They offered to go out for drinks so I could vent. I said no. Maybe another time. Instead, I called Ryan, an old college friend who had moved to the city the year before. We met for burgers and beer. We didn't talk about her. We talked about the chaotic startup he worked at, the absurdity of modern marketing, and the new season of that sci-fi show we both followed. It was simple. Come. A friendship without emotional interrogations. I enrolled in an online certification course for a new programming framework. I had been postponing it for over a year, using being too busy as an excuse. Now my nights had a clear structure: gym, study, cooking. I learned how to sear salmon with crispy skin. Perfected a creamy garlic sauce. I ate alone, leaning against the kitchen island, listening to history podcasts. Every meal was perfect because I had made it for myself. Weeks slipped into months. The season changed. That sharp clarity of betrayal softened until it became just another fact of my past, like a scar you know is there but no longer hurts. I thought about her less and less, and when I did, there was no anger. Julia was a person who had made a choice. I was someone who had learned to accept it. The first whisper of karma arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I met Ryan for coffee. He showed up late, looking uncomfortable, checking his phone as he sat across from me. He apologized and said he'd been pulled into a vortex of drama. I raised an eyebrow while sipping my black coffee. "It's someone we know," he said carefully. He knew I had blocked everything related to Julia's life. Apparently, her new relationship was intense. I didn't ask anything. My silence was an open door, one he could walk through or leave closed. He sighed. His name is Tyler. An entrepreneur. Sells something online. Imported batteries or something like that. He paused. Drives a Maserati. At least rented. A lot of flash. I waited. Seems like he's one of those guys, Ryan continued. From what I hear, it's a roller coaster. 1 week they're in Las Vegas. The next, she's crying at brunch because he doesn't want to put labels on the relationship. Her friends are exhausted. I felt a distant vibration, barely noticeable. It wasn't satisfaction. It was recognition. She had traded a stable home for a loud, unstable bonfire, and that bonfire was burning everything around it. It was the logical outcome of chasing something that wasn't calm or consistent. "Yeah," I said finally. Ryan chuckled softly. I looked out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "She wanted excitement," I added. "Looks like she found it," Ryan said, shaking his head with a slow smile. "Have you changed, Joel? The old you would have worried. You would have asked 5 more questions just to make sure she was okay." He was right. That man had disappeared politely at a dining table months earlier. "I'm not responsible for her decisions," I replied. It was the simplest and most honest sentence I had said in a long time. I changed the subject and asked about his job search. The vibration faded. The water became still again. The seasons changed once more. A year passed. The certification appeared on my professional profile. My salary increased, and for the first time in a long while, everything was exactly where it needed to be. My body had changed gradually, almost silently. It wasn't an exaggerated or dramatic transformation, nothing that drew attention at first glance. I didn't become muscular or imposing, but I did become a sturdier, more functional version of myself. I moved with more confidence. I slept better. I breathed differently. There was a sense of capability that hadn't existed before, as if my body had finally understood it no longer needed to stay in a constant state of tension. The silence in the apartment had changed too. Before, it had been a heavy absence, an uncomfortable echo reminding me of everything that was missing. Now it was different. The silence had become companionship. Space. Something that belonged to me. There was no unnecessary noise, no pending explanations, only order. The reckoning didn't arrive all at once. There was no final scene, no cinematic moment. It didn't strike like thunder. It seeped in slowly like water through small cracks. It didn't come directly from her, but from the remnants of a world we had once shared, a world I had already left behind, yet one that still left scattered traces. One ordinary afternoon I saw Olivia, her best friend, at the supermarket. It was completely unexpected. I recognized her the moment I turned down one of the aisles. Automatically, without thinking much, I steered my cart toward the cereal section to avoid her. I didn't want an awkward conversation or unnecessary explanations. But it was too late. She had already seen me. She looked different than I remembered, harder, more tired. There was visible tension around her eyes as if she hadn't slept well in weeks. She raised her hand in a brief, almost timid greeting, clearly uncomfortable. I responded with a slight nod, just enough not to seem rude. I didn't smile. I didn't stop. I kept walking, pushing the cart, focusing on a box of cereal I didn't even need. A month later, Ryan told me that Olivia and Julia had had a massive fight. Not a minor argument, a complete rupture. They no longer spoke. The reason had a name: Tyler. The few scenes that still leaked through social media, observed indirectly through acquaintances who hadn't yet been cut from the circle, told a clear story without needing words. The expensive dinners and photos in exclusive clubs disappeared completely. Posts became fewer then erratic. A stray sentence about betrayal. A blurry image of a wine glass on a domestic table. Then, entire weeks with absolutely nothing. The final confirmation came from the most reliable source there is. Public data. Objective. Cold. Undeniable. One ordinary night, while I was waiting for a program to finish compiling, I did something I had consciously forbidden myself until then. I looked up Tyler's company, not out of nostalgia or emotional curiosity, but out of pure technical boredom. It was easy. A flashy website loaded with generic images and grandiose phrases like innovation, growth, and synergy. A few more clicks were enough to break through the facade and reach the official state records. The company had been dissolved 6 months earlier for failure to pay fees. No excuses, no interpretations. A recent comment on a local business forum closed the circle. Scammer. Took payments. Never delivered anything. Avoid. The fire had consumed its own fuel and extinguished itself. I felt no satisfaction, no sadness either. It was simply a fact as neutral as the temperature of the day. The option had been explored. The result was worth nothing. The first direct contact came in the form of a message. A number I didn't have saved, but whose area code I recognized immediately. It was Sunday morning. I was reading with the mild sun resting against my back, moving slowly across the page without hurry. Unknown number. Joel, it's Julia. I know I probably shouldn't be writing to you. I think I made a terrible mistake. Can we talk? The words hung on the screen. I felt nothing. No jolt, no physical reaction, not the slightest tightening in my chest. They were just pixels. I saw the typing dots appear, then disappear. She was waiting. I placed the phone face down on the table. Finished the chapter. Made another cup of coffee. I spent a few minutes watching a bird build its nest in the tree outside the window, placing each branch with almost surgical patience. 2 hours later, the phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Please. I picked up the phone calmly. I didn't delete the messages. I opened the contact option and created a new entry. I named it, Do Not Answer. I saved the number, then blocked it. The feeling was clean, precise. I wasn't ignoring her out of resentment or pain. I was filtering out a distraction the same way spam email is removed. Her mistake now belonged exclusively to her. My calm was mine. There was no connection between the two. The exploration was over. I was no longer open territory. I was not a place available for late emotional incursions. I was a sovereign state with clear, closed borders. A week later, the voice message arrived. I was reviewing plans to build a small terrace in the backyard, a tangible project for a tangible life. The phone lit up with the Do Not Answer identifier. I let it ring. I finished measuring a beam and put the audio on speaker while organizing the tools. Her voice sounded different, fragile, worn, stripped of the rehearsed confidence she had used for so long. It's me. I know you probably hate me. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I was cowardly, immature, and I said something horrible to the best person I've ever known. You were my home. I didn't know what I had until I destroyed it. Please, could you call me? I'm completely lost. A wet sob. Then the final click. I saved the audio not as a sentimental keepsake, but as a point of reference. A useful contrast between the arrogance with which she spoke that night at my parents' table and this naked need. It was information. I archived it and moved on. Then came the intervention. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds, but cold, analytical curiosity eventually prevailed. Joel, she began in a forced tone of friendliness. "Hi, how are you?" "Fine, Olivia. How can I help you?" I replied politely, distant, offering nothing extra. There was a pause. She wasn't used to me setting the frame. "I'm calling about Julia. She's not well." "She really isn't. That Tyler guy was a disaster. He took her money, lied to her about everything. None of it was real. She's devastated." "I'm aware that he didn't succeed," I said quietly. My lack of emotional involvement completely dismantled her speech. "She's suffering," she insisted. "She's alone. Many of us are already tired of the drama. She needs someone stable." I waited. "Look," she added, hardening her voice, "I know what she did was horrible, especially at that dinner, but would it really cost you that much to show a little compassion just to talk to her? You were together for 2 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I leaned back in the chair and watched the city lights turn on one by one. "Olivia," I replied, "my compassion ran out a long time ago. I am not responsible for the consequences of Julia's decisions. Freedom always comes with an implicit clause, taking responsibility for the consequences." That was what I said, my voice firm, deliberately adjusted so it wouldn't sound cruel, even if it seemed that way to her. "That's cold, Joel," Julia said from the other end of the line. "It's factual," I answered. "Is there anything else?" There wasn't. She hung up without saying goodbye. That same night, the messages began. Not one or two, waves. Constant pulses cutting through the silence of my apartment like distress signals sent from a ship that had already sunk. I was no longer on board. I didn't reply. "Why won't you answer me?" I didn't reply. I said I was sorry. I didn't reply. "You were never this cruel." I didn't reply. "You've changed." I didn't reply. "This is your revenge. Ignoring me while I'm falling apart." I didn't block the new number. I didn't feel the need to. The messages were like weather reports from a hurricane that had already passed over me. I read them with an almost clinical distance. The subtext was always the same. Her pain was supposed to become my guilt. The final point came on a Thursday night. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. The knife hit the cutting board in a steady, almost meditative rhythm when the building's buzzer rang. I ignored it. It rang again, longer, more insistent. The third time was desperate, chaotic knocking. I sighed, not out of annoyance but mild discomfort. I wiped my hands, walked to the intercom, and pressed the button without saying a word. "It's me. I know you're there. Please, I need to see you." Julia's voice came through the cheap speaker, distorted, trembling. I didn't respond. I released the button. The buzzer rang again, long and agonizing. I knew the neighbors wouldn't take long to complain. To preserve my own calm, I chose the path of least resistance. A brief, clear, definitive interaction. I opened the door. Not all the way. I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed, establishing a clear physical boundary. Julia looked different, smaller. Wrinkled clothes, smeared makeup, tired eyes. The assessing energy that had always defined her was gone, replaced by nervous anxiety. "You're not answering my calls," she accused. "No," I nodded. "What? How can you just shut me out after everything?" She took a step forward. I didn't step back, but I didn't give an inch either. She stopped. "You asked for freedom," I said. "You have it." I made a vague gesture between us. "This is no longer my concern." She let out a short, hysterical laugh. "I'm suffering. The man I left you for was a con artist. He disappeared. My friends too. I have nothing." I stayed silent. I let her words hang in the hallway. "Don't you see?" she begged, tears forming. "It was a mistake. A huge mistake. You were right. You always were. Stability is good. Kindness is good. I want to come home." The word home landed heavily. She wasn't talking about an emotional place. She was talking about my apartment, my life, the stability she had publicly despised. This wasn't an apology, it was a request. "This isn't your home," I said quietly, decisively. Her face cracked, then hardened. The tears dried. The old expression of frustration appeared, the implicit sense of entitlement. "You were never this cold," she snapped. "What happened to you? I broke you so badly. Now you're just this, an empty, bitter shell." I said I was sorry, she added. "What more do you want from me?" There it was. The real face. She wasn't remorseful for what she'd done. She was angry that it hadn't worked. She wanted absolution, shelter, validation, and my refusal offended her. I looked at this furious stranger collapsing in my hallway and felt a calm, absolute certainty. "I want nothing from you, Julia," I said flatly. "Nothing." The simplicity disarmed her. The anger deflated, leaving confusion behind. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. "Goodbye," I said, not as a wish but as a description. I closed the door. I heard a muffled sob, then her footsteps fading down the hallway. I went back to the kitchen, picked up the knife and finished chopping the onion. The tears that blurred my vision were just that, onion, nothing more. Saturday morning, sunlight poured through the glass structure of the urban market. The air smelled of freshly baked bread, roasted coffee, and fruit damp from the recent rain. I held a wicker basket in one hand, Emily's hand in the other. Emily was a landscape architect. I'd met her through a work project. She had a natural calm, a solid presence. Her smile wasn't a performance, it was genuine discovery. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months. It was simple, quiet, reciprocal. We were debating whether heirloom tomatoes had more flavor than perfectly round ones when I felt a gaze lock onto me, that familiar intensity. I looked up. Julia stood a few meters away in front of a wildflower stall. She held an expensive coffee with both hands, untouched, as if she'd forgotten to drink it. Her posture was rigid, too rehearsed for a Saturday morning. She didn't look like she was enjoying the place. She looked like she was there for an entirely different reason. I felt that old pressure between my shoulders even before our eyes met. When they finally did, her expression shifted for a split second. Surprise, calculation, then control. Her eyes dropped to our intertwined hands and snapped back up, quick, precise. Emily noticed my pause immediately. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "Just someone from the past." It wasn't a warning or an apology, just a statement. Julia began to approach. Not rushed. Not hesitant. With that determination she always used when she believed she still had leverage. She stopped at a polite distance as if measuring the ground. "Hi Joel," she said. "Hi Julia." That was it. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was final. Around us, the market kept breathing. Overlapping conversations, paper bags, a guitar playing in the distance. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said, reaching for a casual tone that didn't belong to her. "Neither did I replied. Her eyes returned to Emily. This time she didn't ignore her. "Hi," Julia said, forcing a smile. "Hi," Emily replied, cordial, neither stepping forward nor back. Julia took a deep breath. "I thought maybe we could talk for a moment. Nothing serious, just close some things." I studied her face. I didn't see remorse. I saw discomfort, the kind that appears when reality no longer cooperates with a personal narrative. "There's nothing to close," I said. "Everything is done." "I don't feel that way," she replied. "Things don't end just because one person decides to move on." I looked at her calmly. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly how they end." Emily squeezed my hand lightly, not as desperate support, but as quiet confirmation that she was there. Julia frowned. "So that's it?" she asked. 4 years reduced to this?" "They're not reduced," I answered. "They're placed where they belong." Silence settled again. This time she didn't know what to do with it. She started then stopped. "I thought maybe we could be cordial." "We are," I said. "But that doesn't imply closeness." For the first time her composure cracked, without drama. No tears, just a long, tired exhale. "Well," she murmured. "I guess that's growing up." I didn't reply because it wasn't. I turned slightly toward Emily. "Shall we?" I asked. "Sure," she said. "I wanted to see the bread stall you mentioned." I nodded. Before we walked away, Julia spoke one last time. I stopped but didn't turn fully around. "I hope you're happy," she said. This time it didn't sound like a request or a reproach. It sounded like late acceptance. "I am," I replied. "Take care." And that was all. We walked away unhurriedly. The murmur of the market wrapped around us again. The smell of warm bread replaced any residue of the encounter. Emily walked beside me naturally, without unnecessary questions. After a while she asked, "Do you feel okay?" "Yes," I said. "Better than I expected." We kept moving between stalls, deciding what to buy, commenting on simple things. Real life. Present life. I didn't feel the need to look back. There was no cinematic closure, no grand final line. Just the sober calm of knowing that some stories don't need a dramatic ending to be completely over. The past didn't disappear all at once. It simply stopped carrying weight.